room class on this particular day. I pray that you would be, by your Holy Spirit, speaking through Amanda and Vicky as they teach us and expanding our hearts and our minds to be able to notice you in new ways that we might not have thought about or imagined before, God, because you are higher and wider and deeper and longer and broader than anything that we can wrap our minds around. And so the potential there is limitless. That's so exciting. I pray that this morning we might be drawn more into that mystery. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Yeah. You can stay. You should stay. Can you hear me? But soft. What light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Arise, fair sun, and kill thy envious moon, who is already sick and pale with grief, that thou, her maid, art far more fair than she. Does anybody know what that's from? Romeo and Juliet, right? These few lines from Shakespeare help to illustrate the root of my love for theater as an art form. Romeo confirms that the theater is a place to share your feelings, and often deep, immense personal feelings, where the audience is brought in on a character's unique perspective, especially when employing the handy theatrical device. I did it before. I did it. I did it to... The soliloquy, which is often spoken when a character is alone or oblivious to any hearers present, sharing their innermost thoughts. In my experience, the theater can transport you into the depths of someone else's shoes, which rings so true to my faith and my desire to live out God's wish that we love our neighbors as ourselves. What better way to begin to accomplish this than to learn more of what our neighbor is feeling? And if this neighbor, or the actor sharing the innermost thoughts of this neighbor, is right there in front of you, sharing the same space and breathing the same air, this triggers our hearts to associate and commune with these neighbors in a way we may never have done before. Will you pray with me? Dear God, thank you so much for this opportunity to share a big part of my heart with my church family today. May we each be open and willing to share and grow and better understand and care for one another, so we may live fully into your commandment, that we love one another as you have loved us. Amen. So hi, I'm Amanda Bliss. I am proud to be Pam Wargo's daughter, Gary Bliss's wife, and our 5-year-old daughter, Lily Beth's mom. In APC, I proudly serve as an elder on session, a small group co-leader, a Sunday school teacher. Don't worry, I got a sub for today. And a member of the Working Group for Racial Justice. And until the pandemic shattered and shifted many performing arts institutions in the country, I served as executive assistant to the artistic and managing directors at McCarter Theater Center in downtown Princeton. McCarter is the only professional theater organization in the country that is both a professional producing theater and a major presenter of the performing arts. During my time there, the staff was committed to creating and developing and producing new work for the stage, reinvestigating classical theatrical repertoire and bringing the best of the world's performing arts to central New Jersey. But more on that in a bit. We couldn't talk about theater here at APC without also hearing from the amazing Vicki McLaughlin. She will come up in just a bit to share with you from her incredibly successful and very inspiring 46 years working as a theatrical costume designer. In Vicki's immense dedication to APC, she also provided numerous costumes for events here over the years, including we'll let that do its thing for 1 second. A particularly life-changing, at least for me, Good Friday service called the Service of Darkness, presented during Holy Week in 2000. This service was put on by the senior high youth at the time, of which I was an active member, under Miss Liz Heinzel Nelson's thoughtful, ingenious, and caring leadership. This service and my role in the production was a very pinnacle moment in my artistic journey, which helped to illuminate my passion for the personal nature of theater. In preparation for the service, 4 of us were given a description of a person present during the time of Jesus's death. And we were asked to write our own brief monologue to perform embodying this person. This was a very powerful exercise for me that took my faith and my love for theater as an in-depth exploration of others and brought them together, making for me my faith come alive as I truly tried to place myself in the shoes of a woman who had encountered Jesus, embraced and experienced his grace firsthand, and then was trying desperately to grapple with his death. I would love for all of you to have a similar opportunity. I am going to read aloud to you the prompt that I was given for this service. As I read the character description, I encourage you to try and internalize the details. Allow yourself to connect to this person, and then literally to imagine being them in their body, experiencing their life, and actually meeting Jesus. The song El Shaddai will play in the background as we meditate on this character. In Hebrew, El Shaddai means the God who is more than enough. This was also the song that surrounded my performance at the Service of Darkness those years ago. See if we can get it. We might need to turn it down a little, we'll see. Oops. It's not playing. There is sound. There should be sound. It'd be nice if there's sound.
Shakespeare didn't have to deal with the computer.
Yeah. Very grateful that no one's throwing apples. Thank you so much. Yeah, tomatoes and all the sort. Yes. Ugh. If not, that's okay. It's a very pretty song, though. No, Enoch. That's okay. Definitely Google this song. It's beautiful. Okay, let's all close our eyes. Here is your prompt. This character is the mother of the child who sat on Jesus's lap when he said, "Let the children come to me." At the sight of the crucifixion, she holds the doll her daughter had with her when she met Jesus. She talks about how much she loved Jesus's stories and laments what they have done to him. She calls the soldiers murderers, guilty of killing a storyteller. Allow these details to wash over you. I will read them again, and this time try to internalize them. Imagine being this woman, remembering her life experiences as your own, and meeting Jesus. Your character is the mother of the child who sat on Jesus's lap when he said, "Let the children come to me." At the sight of the crucifixion, she holds the doll her daughter had with her when she met Jesus. She talks about how much she loved Jesus' stories and laments what they've done to him. She calls the soldiers murderers, guilty of killing a storyteller. We will meditate on this for a few moments now. Let's slowly open our eyes and take a deep breath in through your nose and let it out through your mouth. I imagine the experience that each of you had was different, but I wonder if we can show by raising our hands if you were able to feel a bit of this woman's life in your own skin. Amazing. Professor Isabel Gatt writes in her article, Theater, A Space for Human Connection, published in Psychology Today in 2020, in becoming actors who can sing, dance, and act out a story on their own, the cast of a play is not only learning to engage multidimensional realities over time, they are practicing empathy. In taking on a role in a play, memorizing lines is only the beginning. An actor seeks points of resonance between herself and the character that she imitates and mobilizes in herself to become the shape of the other. In the process, she must awaken potentials for experience in herself that she may not yet have manifested. Here, empathy is not a skill that passes between self and other, nor is it strictly emotional intelligence. Empathy transforms from within. It requires that a person access sensory patterns that support the person in moving as another. Now, the unique thing about theater is you take this actor full of empathy and living out the innermost feelings of their characters, and you put them in the same physical space, face to face with other people, the audience. And now you are all having this live, in the moment, never to repeat it again exactly the same way experience together. A powerful concept indeed. Professor Gatt goes on to say that live theater provides an occasion for people on stage and off to come together, to work together, to create another reality, a community in which all parts move in the service of a shared vision. The connection between artist and audience in the moment of performance helps them both go as deep as they can. Live theater is a way of being together that nourishes in each individual the resilience, the hope, the joy, the courage, the focus, and the determination that we need in order to keep creating the worlds in which we want to live. Groundbreaking theater director Peter Brook, whose text, The Empty Space, was a key element in my theater education, cited human connection as the essence of good theater and the soul of his work. His productions aimed to call the audience's inner emotions forth, so they were truly moved. This is what I too love about directing: to delve into the world of a play and focus on the details of connection layered between the characters. When I would encourage an actor to lean into a look, a touch, a moment, or a pause, I imagined the energy being created in that moment, and I hoped that it would be felt by the audience too. I majored in theater at Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania with a concentration in directing. Although my time in the theater department there included classes in each aspect of theater production, from scenic design to costume design, theater history, acting, directing, etc. I deeply respected and helped with each aspect of our productions, but directing was my favorite. I felt a great sense of calm and assuredness in finding my vision for scenes and plays, and eventually my thesis, where I spliced scenes from Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra with scenes from Romeo and Juliet to expose the similarities and the differences in these two pairs of star-crossed lovers, giving them a little perspective amidst their haste and interactions with characters from the other play. And I almost burned down the theater when the candles on stage caught their pewter candlesticks on fire. I didn't. The summer after I graduated, I excitedly began working at McCarter Theater Center. I spent the next 13 years there, working my way up from the ticket office to the business office to the marketing office, and finally to assist the artistic and managing directors for 10 years before the pandemic forced a layoff of most of the staff. I became close to both directors, spending weekends with managing director Tim Shields' young daughter, Blair, when her mom was very sick. On the administrative side, I worked closely with the 40 members of the Board of Trustees, as well as the 80 members of the full staff. As assistant to the artistic and resident playwright at McCarter Theater, Emily Mann, I was truly immersed in the artistic side of professional theater. Emily is an award-winning Broadway theater director and playwright whose documentary-style plays earned the praise Voice for the Voiceless. Watching her watch a play was an education all in itself. She felt the emotions of each character on stage and fully engaged with the moment. She also began her rehearsals with yoga, which was such a beautiful way to bond a cast together. To perform, often emotional content, performance after performance, a cast must develop a good deal of trust for one another. And in practicing this relaxing yoga together each morning, this instilled a respect for each of the cast members as individuals, body and soul. As Emily's assistant, I also attended design meetings, preliminary rehearsals, and technical rehearsals in New York before a show would open to the public. Dress rehearsal on Broadway for Emily's direction of Tennessee Williams' A Streetcar Named Desire with the first ever all-Black cast was particularly memorable. I hosted dinners at Emily's house for each new cast and design team. McCarter produced about 5 full productions each season. And there I heard from Michael Shannon's wife how they excitedly planned their wedding for Christmas morning as a surprise for their young daughters. This, among countless others, beautiful, very human stories told from rather well-known actors and designers. Emily and I are still close. She is such a warm, caring, and empathetic and creative person, driven largely by her emotions, which I can definitely relate to. Although McCarter's fully produced productions were incredible and choreographed down to the smallest detail by directors and the stage managers, and built and orchestrated by literally a miracle working technical team, My personal favorite way to experience a play is in its fledgling stages, at a play reading. The playwright may just have finished the piece and they are hearing their play for the first time along with the audience. Or a playwright is working through their latest draft and they need to know what to do now. Or the play may be getting ready for production. Either way, there's no set, there's no lighting, no costumes, no props, no sound generally, just actors behind music stands, perhaps having read through the play just once themselves with a director beforehand. It is a transportive experience for me as I listen and I imagine the full aesthetic of a production in my own mind. I had the amazing opportunity to sit directly in front of nationally recognized political activist and leader of the second wave's feminism, Gloria Steinem, as she tried out Emily's play adaptation of her life called Gloria, a Life. In the singular and spellbinding reading, I got to hear this incredible woman share moments in her life of great personal hardship, imagining all the aesthetic details in my own mind. And the event I looked forward to most in a McCarter season was called In the Writer's Voice. The opportunity to hear a playwright read their own words just seems like magic to me. I also often knew the playwrights personally. I could identify the vulnerability in their stories, which grappled with real life insecurities, complicated relationships, regrets, fears, hopes, and dreams. I had often spent a good deal of time with these playwrights during McCarter's annual artist retreat. For 10 days, 9 artists would be in residence at the Palmer House Inn, Princeton University's private breakfast. The group would gather for all meals, and they were given ample research and dramaturgy support, but there was never any expectation to complete something at the end of the retreat. This was a very important element to Emily, who created the retreat. As a playwright herself, she knew how much her fellow writers needed time to retreat from the world and write. I orchestrated the events throughout the retreat as a time for artists to bond and learn from one another in an attempt to bring some community to an often lonely occupation. During a morning pastries and pages gathering, I got to hear actor, he's right here in the hat, Dennis O'Hare, read from the play he was adapting from Homer with director Lisa Peterson. This play would then go on to be my favorite production of all at McCarter, an Iliad. I was completely captivated by such an epic story told in a most intimate way. Michael Summers wrote beautifully about the production for the New York Times, titling his theatrical review, "A Traveling Storyteller, Weary of the Awfulness of War." He wrote, "This one-man adaptation stars Stephen Spinella, a weary, wandering poet, whose travels across the centuries now find him hastily padding onto an empty stage in Princeton. Barefoot and shabbily dressed, this storyteller seems reluctant to begin his tale, but seeing the audience before him, he sets down his suitcase, squints into the light, and launches into an Iliad, with a short blast of Greek evoking the muses to help him describe the rage of Achilles. Every time I sing this song, I hope it's the last," he confides. Gathering his memory, the poet begins an oral epic recounting the final battles of the 9-year war between the invading Greeks and the besieged Trojans. As he talks about ruined civilizations and how blind rage can overwhelm people, as they are on the battlefield or merely cut off by a car on the highway, the poet asks viewers, "Do you see?" And indeed we do, especially switching from our heroic declaratory urgent delivery tells the audience to recognize the dialogue then in this instance, come on.
Just keep going.
In this instance, theater had the remarkable power to make an epic story truly intimate and personal. Also of note is the theater's ability to make an intimate story and give it power by telling it in an epic way. I will never forget the feedback from one of McCarter's outreach programs, which had assigned professional playwrights to a group of women at Homefront, the incredible organization in New Jersey that many of you are probably familiar. The women there were encouraged to share their life stories, which the playwrights then wrote into plays. When the women heard their words read aloud by professional actors, they were deeply moved. They shared that it allowed them to recognize their own worth as human beings and to see their lives as actually important. I found the theater community as a whole to be a place of great acceptance, understanding, and palpable love. On January 19th, 2017, members of the theater community across the country, from Broadway to regional theaters to high schools and colleges and community theaters, came together to launch the Ghost Light Project. Oh, sorry, I skipped that one. Gathering outside of theaters on the eve of the presidential election, people joined in a collective, simultaneous action, together creating light for challenging times ahead. Inspired by the tradition of leaving a ghost light, which is the top picture, on a darkened theater, artists and communities made or renewed a pledge to stand for and protect the values of inclusion, participation, and compassion for everyone, regardless of their race, class, religion, country of origin, immigration status, disability, age, gender identity, or sexual orientation. The aim was to create a safe space that will serve as lights in the coming years. As I stood outside McCarter that evening with my coworkers, the current cast members and designers, board members, and patrons, I felt extremely proud to work in the theater industry. My favorite play of all time may be surprising to you, or maybe not, depending on if you read it and had the same experience as I, to Shakespeare's Richard III. Okay, thanks. I have never been compelled to care so deeply for such a seemingly heartless villain. But the thing is that Richard is more than just a villain. He is human, a child of God, if you will. And in the first few lines of the play, Richard shares with us his deepest pains, insecurities, and fears. He bears his heart to the audience, and he declares that he himself finds himself unworthy of love. But I, he says, that I'm not shaped for sportive tricks, nor made to court an amorous looking glass. I, that am rudely stamped and want love's majesty to strut before a wanton ambling nymph. I, that am curtained of this fair proportion, cheated a feature by dissembling nature, deformed, unfinished, sent before my time into this breathing world, scarce half made up. And that's so lamely and unfashionable that dogs bark at me as I halt by them. Why I, in this weak piping time of peace, have no delight to pass away the time, unless to spy my shadow in the sun and descant on my own deformity. And therefore, since I cannot prove a lover to entertain these fair, well-spoken days, I am determined to prove a villain and hate the idle pleasures of these days. This raw, heartbreaking account of Richard's inner thoughts emotionally bonded me to his character. So much so that I found myself caring for him deeply, even as he went on to do awful, terrible acts. If our hearts can be opened by the fragile truth displayed on stage and called to be present with our neighbors, then the theater is succeeding in connecting us. And God can show us the way of love, to rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep, and truly live as he hopes for us, that you love one another as I have loved you. Without further ado, we welcome Miss Vicki McLaughlin to the podium.
My favorite play happens to be Much Ado About Nothing. I love it. And my favorite speech is from As You Like It. It's Jacques, when he starts his speech, all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. I love that. And it goes on. I cannot quote Shakespeare anywhere near as well as my husband or my son. But I can sit and watch Romeo and Juliet or Macbeth or Hamlet and recite the whole play along with the actors. That I can do because I really do know the speeches, but I get nervous doing them aloud by myself. But hi, I'm Vicki Esposito, and I was gifted by God with design creativity. I am retired, but I was a professor. No, excuse me. I was a professional costume designer for 46 years. A professor for 43 at Rutgers University, and a baker since age 9. I have an MFA from University of Minnesota, where I met my beloved husband, Jeff McLaughlin. How do you know I'm a costume designer? Well, once in New Brunswick, a reviewer from the Home News came to talk to me, and I had just attended a board of directors meeting of Rutgers University. So I was dressed in a black skirt suit. He looked at me and he said, "You don't look like a designer." And I said, "Okay, what does a designer look like?" And he said, "Well, they have flowing scarves and they have lots of bracelets." So ever since, when I've gone out to give a speech about costuming, and I've done many, I have always worn flowing scarves and lots of bracelets because I don't want to disappoint the audience. I think theater has 3 divisions: administrative, creative, and tech. People like the artistic director span the administrative and the creative. Playwrights are creative, directors are creative, designers are creative. And then we have that whole tech team for which we couldn't do without them. It's that simple. I think I'm a craftsperson. I wouldn't be as good at quoting anything or figuring out things the way Amanda has done. By the way, I really have always, I remember talking about Amanda when she was in her college, talking about theater in general. And I really respect her work with Emily Mann because I really respect Emily Mann and McCarter Theater. So I always loved what Amanda was doing. I do not conceive alone. My job as a designer means depicting the playwright's characters through the vision of the director. It's not, I can't make those designs up for theater myself. I have to do what the director wants me to do to depict. And my answer to my students when they said, "Well, what if you don't like what they're doing?" I said, "You have 2 choices. You do what they want or you quit." That's it. There's no, director's the boss, guys. That's the way theater goes. So you do what you can within that to be really creative about the designs, but you got to start with what the director wants. I began my career as the resident designer for Chimera Theater, St. Paul, Minnesota for 2 years. That's the first couple renderings. Then Jeff and I moved to New York City, where I got the job at Rutgers. I taught for 43 years and headed the grad costume design program and the undergraduate design program. In my first years, I designed all the shows and opera productions, but when we started the grad program, I had my grad students do all the theater designs. I wanted them to practice what they were learning, so I talked the faculty into letting their grad students do it. I did keep the opera. Valerie Goodall, the head of opera, was a very good friend, and I did her shows because we were such close friends. And then very late, I let the grad students do those, but those I when Valerie retired. So then I moved to freelance work in New Brunswick at first. I knew and designed for my friend and college buddy, Eric Krebs, who founded George Street Playhouse, and for my former acting students, although I didn't teach acting, but in our program, Lee Richardson and Ricardo Kahn, who founded Crossroads Theater. Then I spread a little further. I did some shows in Philadelphia. I ended up working freelance for many years for the Drama Guild, the Arden Theater, Philadelphia Theater Company, and the Wilma. And that's what you're seeing in the portfolio stuff here. This side is all one thing, and this side is all Philly Shakespeare. This is a group of people. I could not access all of my renderings for 46 years. There's a lot of stuff. And I know it's up there, but Jeff has been sick this week. I wasn't going to ask him to plow through the attic to find some of that stuff. I found what I could. When asked on an official faculty form, what I like best, I replied, designing for new plays or Shakespeare. That was before I ever started the last 33 years of my career. Then I worked at the Philly Festival of New Plays with Carol Rockamora for 13 years, and then 20 years as a designer for Philadelphia Shakespeare with Carmen Kahn. I found Carmen a particularly brilliant director in bringing Shakespeare's language to a place where the basic audience who wasn't familiar with Shakespeare could understand what was happening. I thought she was just a genius. Louise Grafton was our press mistress that I kind of got on board there. And Louise and I agreed. Louise's husband is Tony Grafton. Louise has passed away, unfortunately. And he's the foremost Renaissance scholar in the world. He's considered that. And so Louise really is very, very, we argued all the time because I think Much Ado is the best one and she likes 12th Night much better. She told me that it's not as well written. And I said, I don't care how well it's written, it plays better. And we had arguments all the time. But Louise and I agreed that Carmen was just a genius. And although you always have frustrations with directors, I stayed with her because I loved what I was doing. I retired from Rutgers in June 2018. And in July 2018, Carmen closed the theater, despite a very successful season with wonderful reviews and sold out houses. All right. So it was really a good season. So that isn't what sent her. I don't want to go into the details of why, but she did. And I had intended to retire and keep designing for Philly Shakespeare. Didn't happen. But we were planning a trip to Greece for my retirement. And we went ahead to plan that. And I let some of the freelance stuff go. I could have worked at a lot of places in Philly, but I just didn't want to at that point. And then in the spring of 2017, I had my second mastectomy. When I would have been doing Philly Shakespeare. And I decided that the closing of the theater and the cancer meant I should simply retire. So I did. In a discussion with Jeff planning this, I realized that my creativity and love of God involves my volunteer work. Sarah's wedding gown, which I'm going to show in a minute, brings me to my sharing my creative spirit for God, love, my church, and my family. Now, how do I get this on? All right, these are the steps that a designer takes when doing a show. You'll notice that the third one says research, or I don't know if it's the third, it's probably further down. Oh, what happened to the first page?
The left arrow.
Yeah. It's not giving it to me. There it is. No, it's not there. The sixth one says research, research, research. I research no matter what I'm doing. And when I designed Sarah's wedding gown, and I'm going to show you my other friend's wedding gown, I did the same kind of research that I would do for any of these. Sometimes you see the research beside them, and sometimes it's just things like this. It's images that I cut out. This one, we were working on a more modern concept for Hamlet, and I decided to cut out a whole bunch of modern images to show to Carmen, to show her how I felt about characters. That's what I did before I ever set a pencil to paper. You have all of these steps, and each time what you're conceiving has to be approved by the director. When you look at stuff up here, I did Much Ado 3 or 4 times, I can't remember, but I know I did Romeo and Juliet 4 times, I did Macbeth 4 times, I did Hamlet 4 times in the years I worked at Philadelphia Shakespeare, and a lot of the others more than once. When you run a Shakespeare company, you're going to use, they sell. They're the ones that sell. So every year you do one of the ones that sells and one of the ones that's not done as much, is the way it kind of works out. And that's what Carmen did. So I got to do a lot of my beloved Shakespeare more than once. I took my son to see a lot of the dress rehearsals before he was old enough to actually sit still in an audience. So my son really loves Shakespeare. As I said, he can quote it better than I can. He amazes me. He comes up with these quotes sometime in the middle, the way Amanda was using the quotes, he uses them when we're having discussions. So I always said that I didn't care if I got a doctor or a lawyer, my son. I wanted someone who spoke the language well and loved Shakespeare, who loved others and was polite to others and worked. He does those things. I mean, I didn't care about doctors and lawyers. I cared about those things. And I wouldn't there's a character in a play that's Mrs. Malaprop, and she uses language wrong. She would use a word, it's a big fancy word, but she uses it all wrong. And I told him he was never going to be allowed to malaprop in my house. Every time he says it and he uses it the wrong way, we have a debate, because I said, that's not the way you use that word. We have to get it correct. That's just me. That's who I am. Anyway, now let's, I hope, go to the next. No, I'm not. All right. This is my first wedding gown design. Now, I designed many wedding gowns over the years. There's a picture of Olivia the 12th night in many shows. I designed wedding gowns, but this one's for a very good friend. This one was done for love. These, my friends, Kate and Lou, are theater buffs. We traveled in the late 80s. There was Laker to London was taking stuff over, or not stuff over, groups over to London to see plays, and you could get a flight and I don't know, 5 nights of theater, and I don't remember what else, but anyway, it was $299 the first time Kate and Lou and Jeff and I went. And then that was Laker, and then it went up, but it took a few years for it to go up high enough that we said, oh, wait a minute, we're not going to do this now. And we watched as much as we could while we were over there. I loved it. I also, in my work for Rutgers, I wrote a program for design for the Globe Theater. The Globe designer, Jenny Tiramani, ran the program for me over there. She's both a set and costume designer, but she's primarily costumes, but she does both. She's always Brit designers usually do both. They usually don't do one the way we do here in this country. And so she had this program for my students, and I went over at the end of the first semester, that is when they went, and I went over at the end and saw their work that they had created. I also always saw whatever Shakespeare the Globe was doing. And then when they opened the new Jacobean Theater, I got to see that. So that was a thrill for me. Okay, so this is my friend Kate. This is someone you should recognize. This is Colonel Dr. Sarah Vick. I'll tell you my story of Sarah. Sarah and I are very good friends. The first time she ever walked into our church, I happened to be ushering. She stopped to chat with me a while and told me about that, and then she took her seat. My husband that day was announcing a meeting for the Guatemala mission. She came up to me after church and she said, "Do you think about this Guatemala mission?" And I looked at her and I said, "Well, you should ask." And I took her over to the meeting. At the meeting, she declared that she was going to Guatemala. And I looked at her and I said, "Okay." And we went on with the meeting, and Jeff counted her into that. And she said, "By the way, I'm a doctor." And so it was a very useful thing. At the end of the meeting, I know I walked up to her and I said, "I'm really glad you're going to go, but who are you?" It was really, we've been friends ever since. We became very good friends. And, you know, Sarah did a lot of work. So when she asked me to do this, I was glad to do it. I did it with the same set of steps that I would do a theater design. I pasted pictures of wedding gowns from the wedding magazines all over. We discussed what Sarah was looking for. Sarah changed the whole thing 4 times, because at first she was going to have a wedding in Washington and then a reception where his family was in Pittsburgh and another one in Iowa. And then she changed it. She was going to do something else. And then she changed it again. And she finally changed it and said, "No, we found this wonderful venue in West Virginia. We're going to have it there. And my whole family's going to come, and so is his." So, which is good, because Kath, who was going to sew the gown for me, was getting a little frustrated with, "When are we going to do this? What's happening?" The difference between a couture design and mine is that the couture design is done for some mannequin in the, they usually have some kind of model that they work for, or work towards. It's not some mannequin in the sky. This was designed for Sarah Vick. It is not designed in general. It's designed to flatter her figure. She wanted a modest neckline, all those, you know, a lot of modern wedding gowns. She didn't want that. And so that's what I did here. Sarah was absolutely thrilled at the step where you swatch fabrics. You go find fabrics, you get them approved by the director. Well, that's changed in recent years. You don't go and get fabrics. You used to have to go in the shop and they'd cut it for you and they'd staple it to a card and said how much per yard. Nowadays, you don't do that. You take a picture. But you have to carry the fabrics. You have to carry a lot of stuff around. Well, I don't have an assistant anymore. I had an assistant all those years, different ones, but I had so Jeff McLaughlin learned a lot about what it was like to swatch, because I have to walk with the cane most of the time. So Jeff came into New York and was my assistant for all of that stuff. And when people pulled out bolts so that I could look at it better, I had a hard time. I found out one of the flaws of taking pictures is it's hard to get the sparkly stuff in the pictures, but that's what Sarah liked. So that you can't see that, but that thing has beadwork all over it. And she loved it. Sarah, I did the headpiece. My former shop supervisor, Kathy Homarocchio, who will still do a freelance thing now and then, made the dress. I just did the headpiece, which I love doing. And this is Sarah and Mark at the end of the ceremony, at the end of the real ceremony. I didn't say those first pictures were the final fitting. This is the actual wedding. Okay.
Gorgeous.
What?
That sleeve is gorgeous.
Yeah, it really was pretty. It was beautiful fabric. So, okay. designed a lot of things over the years. I've made many things for the church. I borrowed costumes or whatever. We have a very tall pastor. So one of the first things I did was make a biblical gown that reached long enough because all the stuff we had was too short. So I made him a full-length biblical robe so that he wouldn't have that problem. This is the 300th anniversary celebration with Presbyterian, which was held here. And Stephen has a coat. I'm sure he still has it. He better. And a tricorn for that. And then my husband also spoke and dealt with that particular ceremony. And that's my husband in the same kind of costume that I got for him. This is a picture of my favorite time in Guatemala. The lady made an apron. I taught them to make aprons. And she had a lot of scraps left over. And I loved that little girl. So she went home after the class. And after we were done our programming in the evening, I went over to that craft room and I made an apron that matched for the little girl. And she loved it. It was a big thrill for her to have an apron like her mommy. So that's why this is my favorite memory of teaching the sewing class. I can sew, but we'll get to that in a minute. Anyway, this is my brother's daughter, Devin, and my sister's daughter, Rachel. I love this set of costumes. People always ask me what was my favorite costume that I designed. I had this framed on my desk and I always showed them this. What we did, and this leads me to the next part, my baking. Mom was complaining that Paul didn't bring Devin often enough, but she saw my sister's kids all the time. And so I said, well, invite her to tea. That was just a joke. Next thing I knew, my mother was having tea for all her granddaughters and they had to wear costumes. Jamie's oldest, my niece, I had made a princess gown, a Disney princess gown for every year, but these guys didn't have them. So they happened to be coming to stay with me. And I said, I'll take care of it, Mom. I took them over to Red, White, and Blue, and I let them choose whatever hats they wanted, whatever jewels they wanted, gloves, whatever they wanted. And we got a couple bridesmaids dresses and I altered them somewhat to fit. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. To fit those little girls. So that's really my favorite design. That's love of family. I know where that comes from. And I always told people it was my favorite design. Baking is my avocation and second creative outlet. I can also do many craft things. An example is the Sunday school manger set, which I spearheaded that you've seen every year. That's a craft thing. And several years ago, Mary Hokish saw an ad for a tea that the old barracks was going to have. So the old barracks had that tea, and I talked to my friends and a lot of other people wore hats. And the old barracks decided that hats were just, everybody loved them. They were going to have a hat contest the next year. Okay. I decided I'm winning that contest. I should, because I'm a costume designer. Who should win? So when we went to Guatemala that summer, I don't know how well you can see him, but there is a beaded lizard in this hat. Okay. And it's a fascinator. The things that Kate wore, this is a fascinator. In theater, we just call it a headpiece. But anyway, it's a fascinator. And I wore it and we chose the winner by votes from all the people that were there. I won. I was gonna win and I won. So it's just one of those funny things. I can do crafts. I love doing hats. I don't like sewing very much, frankly, but I like other things like creating manger figures or whatever. Those are things I really love to do. I love crafts and hats in particular. But back to my avocation of baking. Well, I did that.
If you would probably have like 3 minutes.
Okay. Well, you've kind of seen a lot of I'm not going to go through them. We have a household of 3 who cook. Jeff worked as a chef in New York. My son went to the Culinary Institute in Hyde Park. We had a lot of Valentine teas for raising money. We had dinners, we had a brunch at our house, we had a dinner at the Bunton's house across from the, so we did a lot of that and did a lot of work with me on that. We did a sweets table for Pastor Steve's daughter's wedding. And we did, 3 of us got together for JC and Noel's wedding, what do you call it, the rehearsal dinner. And we did it was a big elaborate dinner. And we did, and I'm gonna do a sweets table for people who are gluten-free or whatever, you know, dairy-free, gluten-free, etc., for Isaac and Julia's wedding. So that's some of the stuff that I have done with my baking ability and my cooking ability. And I think it's where you see my love of God. I also did, I mean, I did a lot. I had teas for my students every year. I did a lot of other stuff, but those are the things that apply to the church. After practicing this speech for my husband, I'm a theater person. We practice. We timed it. And he said something which really resonated with me. If not me, then who? And so, would you pray with me? Dear Lord, thank you for this fellowship and time of Christian education. Holy Spirit, thank you for shining your light on the creativity which exists in this congregation. Thank you, great God, Creator, for imbuing many of us with your creative spirit. May we use this gift to your greater glory. Please bless all our mission projects and those who work for them. We answer the call. Is it I, Lord? If not me, then who? Amen. I'm sorry, I always get choked up.
Thank you so much, Vicky. That was a beautiful prayer. I'm not going to pray again. That was it, guys. That was amazing. I just want to invite you back again next week. We have 2 more weeks of this class. Next week is Courtney Stover. She's going to be teaching us about graphic design, so changing tack a little bit. And then for our final week, we'll be hearing from Ann Diebel about writing. So we would love to invite you to come back and join us as we wrap up this class, which has been so meaningful for me. And I hope for many of you. And then we will be changing tack for the season of Lent. And I'll tell you more about that next week. But thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you, Vicky. And if you guys want to come and look at the portfolio work that's up here and chat with Vicky, ask any questions that you have, I'm sure Amanda would love to answer questions as well. But thank you. We'll see you in worship.
So fast.
Yeah, I know. Where did the time go?
Well, we kept being too short. My husband kept saying, add more, add more.